It comes and goes. We're out here chasing a feeling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Martini, along with my favorite human, Becky McNattin. We are glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health.
I'm glad I'm your favorite human.
You are, girl.
Oh, we have a very cool show today, Tara.
So cool.
I've been thinking so much about it. We have special guest Juliana Keen here, joining us today to talk through life transitions and the mental health impact of change. Welcome, Juliana.
Thank you so much. I've never met Tara, but we have something in common because Becky is one of my favorite humans too.
Oh,
wow, look at that.
We're excited to have you on the show today and process through all of the things related to life transition and change. When I was thinking through topics, I realized and learned that major life transition occurs every 12 to 18 months throughout our lifetime. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
It means that we spend a significant amount of time anticipating change, processing the experience of change, and actually integrating transition into our daily lives. And Juliana, you're a therapist who has made a whole career out of processing life transitions. So we wanted to have you on to talk about all of this. As we get started, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me first. I will share about myself. I'm a mama of two boys.
Okay.
I am a third generation, almost fourth generation therapist.
Wow.
Didn't start out as a therapist. I tried to avoid that path given we were saturated in our family, but started out in the social justice and community organizing space.
Okay.
And then went through a major life transition myself in 2020 and involved unraveling many different parts of my life, including career and where we lived and what we were doing with our lives. It wasn't an expected transition, but that made me rethink what I wanted to do and really felt as toward the end of that transition that becoming a therapist was the path that felt right for me.
Incredible. So not only is it a passion of yours, literally you went through your own in what called you to the profession.
Absolutely. And that's what made me think about the juiciness of transition and how much support we need in that time when things feel so up in the air and confusing.
Well, and fascinating, it brought you back to your roots.
Right.
Yeah. What would you say transition is?
That's a great question. You know, sometimes we interchange the words change and transition. And I think of change as more the things that happen externally to us or that you can see, like, oh, I have a new house or I have a new job or, you know, I have a new haircut or look. Whereas transition is really the internal work that can go along with what's happening on the outside. So transition is that internal process of identity. Who am I now? Who am I in this new place? So it's a much more internally focused process than change.
Kind of that adaptation, as I just said the word integration, the idea of what we do with change.
Correct.
Which becomes us in that experience.
Yes.
That's really interesting to think about it that way.
Right. So it's the internal change versus the external.
It's what's happening to us as a human.
Right.
And how we think of ourselves, how we think of the world, our relationships,
et
cetera.
What makes you passionate about it?
You know, I say this in a non-religious way, but there's something sacred about the process of change. And it's where I see the juiciness of life, of the depth of life, of this question, who am I? Who am I becoming? Who was I? This shedding of things that don't work or we can't have anymore. And there's just something really profound about being able to be a witness alongside people as they bravely and courageously, you know, in your language, Becky and Tara, become who they are.
Yeah.
Well, and that is such a sacred thing in itself for you to be witnessing that.
I can't tell you how lucky I feel in my day-to-day work.
I can't wait to talk about this more.
I know.
A great discussion, and we're going to keep unfolding it all. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned for more discussion on life transitions and a way to embrace this in our lives. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud. We will be right back in a moment.
Well, then you'll find yourself. You gotta find the people
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Tara Martini, along with Becky McNattin. Let's dive right back into life transitions and the impact of these on mental health.
There is so much to talk about when it comes to transitions, and I feel like we just tapped the surface in the last segment.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, based on what you were saying, Juliana, I feel like every single day requires adaptation to things that are changing outside of us. And as I've been thinking about this more, it's almost like what isn't transition?
Right.
That everything is. So I understand as we talk about this topic more, really we could get so huge with it because it's coming at us all of the time.
And thank goodness it is, because life would be so redundant and boring, right?
There is this positive side of it. Yes, that you talk about the kind of evolution of us as people, how we morph, and you mentioned the word become. I have huge bias on that word become. I think it's awesome. And so there is opportunity that comes from transition. But I know we're just going to, in the next few minutes, we're only going to get to scratch a little bit of what this is. Because we're always growing and developing as people. Our relationships change, our values shift, our roles and responsibilities are always moving. So transition really is this fundamental part of humanity, and it truly is all the feels. It really is all the feels. On your website, Juliana, you share change is a normal part of life, but not easy to do in isolation. Tell us more about what you mean about this, because I loved that quote.
I think what we mean by this is that we live in a dominant culture that really values knowing things and knowing what's next, and efficiency and effectiveness and sound bites of like, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. Oh, you ended that job, or you lost that job. What's next for you?
Well, because it's at our fingertips, literally, with the cell phone, right? Where before it wasn't instant, where someone didn't know instantly, I quit my job, or I bought a house, or
and just, I think there's, I think we like the illusion of control in life. And then when someone goes through a significant transition, that really, this like idea of efficiency or effectiveness or knowing the answer is really not available in a true transition. It takes way more time than we think it's going to take. I think really true transition involves a period of not knowing the answer.
For sure.
And in our culture, I think it can feel, when you're in that place, like really isolating and alone, because it's like, oh, everyone else seems to know what they're doing, or I'm the only one that feels like I have no clue which end is up, or and that must mean there's something wrong with me as a person. And it's such a how, since we're all doing this all the time, to feel that way seems unnecessary. Like I know in your practices, or we've talked, Becky, about like sort of a primary pain, which is like the thing you can't avoid, like, oh, this event was really painful, but then the secondary pain, and there's something wrong with me, or some judgment on myself because I'm going through it, or I'm having to go through this alone. And so I think speaking to not doing it in isolation is like removing that secondary pain. Like, no, we can do this in community. We need to do this in community throughout all of history. I mean, like human history, we have done transition and change in community. This is like a new thing. Like, oh, you're all on your own in your house.
Right. Well, and community is so important, but also that aspect of trying to eliminate the comparison piece.
Right.
So I'm just so curious. So what are the stages of transition?
Yeah, so there's different models out there. I give credit to William Bridges on this work around stages of transition. And, I'm not a super linear person, so they can go backwards and forwards and repeat. But the way we think about it is that all transitions begin with an ending. So something, as you know, it has ended. And, I talk to clients, like, we like to think, again, in this sort of expedient world we live in, like, one door closes and then the window opens. But in reality, after something ends, the second stage is usually, or I would say almost always, a period of this not knowing. So the second stage of transition is this, we call it like the messy middle, or the neutral zone. Like, I'm not what I was, but I don't know what I am. And then from there, the third stage of transition is a new beginning. Like, what am I now? Who am I now feeling into that space?
Right. Well,
Mm.
and I would guess that that first stage and that third stage we talk about, right? Because the end and the beginning, but that messy middle you discuss must be that unsettling part that we don't think about until we're in it.
Yeah.
And then we're like, wait a second, ick,
That's really insightful. I completely agree with you.
what is this?
Yes, I don't like this.
Very unsettling. Well, we get ourselves as humans thinking about settled as knowing. You mentioned that. We also write permanency
Right.
to our experiences so often. And so that lack of clarity can be really hard in that middle where we actually don't know what's coming. We do know what ended though.
Yeah.
And that makes transition full of loss and grief.
Right. I mean, I think the first stage of transition, especially, and all of them in different ways, is particularly marked by grief and loss. And I want to say, even the joyful transitions, you know, even the ones like getting married or having your first child or, you know, moving in with a partner that, you know, we think of those as like, why would those involve grief? But all of those involve some kind of loss as well, a loss of a piece of your identity, a piece of maybe freedom or a way that you knew yourself or a life that you experienced. And I think sometimes people don't expect that even in the ones that we look forward to, that they're usually and often, and it's normal to have grief around those too.
Right. Yeah. Well, you kind of mention a different kinds of change or different transitions that we might have, and research highlights there are actually quite a few different types of life transitions. And you mentioned, Juliana, what lots of us would think of as transition, these anticipated changes that are things we expect based on goals or life circumstances, things like graduating from school, maybe high school, or getting an apartment, moving out of a house we were raised in, but perhaps starting a career. And I think about in those anticipated changes, you said it so beautifully, that there is loss in those, sometimes loss of roles, how we knew ourselves to be, even how we operated in the world around us, what our patterns were, what our habits were, people who we associated with in those moments. So when something ends, it's even those anticipated changes come with these spaces of stress. And I think about how we navigate those things, both in what we anticipated as part of the change, but every anticipated change is also going to have parts of this that we didn't see coming.
No. Yep. And every person is going to handle it differently. I have so many clients right now in this anticipated stage because they're graduating college, they're graduating high school. And it is that piece of, well, there's things I know that are happening, but then there's all these other things they're navigating going, wait, I didn't know that this was part of this, right? Because we've all been there in the graduate high school, graduate college, because those are things we anticipate. But what we don't think about are those unanticipated things that, well, wait.
Yeah, right.
Well, now what?
Are there mental health components to anticipated changes that you see, Juliana?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's mental health components to both anticipated, unanticipated, all of the different transitions, both I don't want to use positive and negative language, like both, you know, the more comfortable emotions.
Yeah, maybe energizing, depleting.
Energizing, thank you for language. Yeah. So I think some of the emotions that can come along are, like we talked about, grief and loss. And one of the things I like to mention when we talk about grief is that grief begets grief. So if you, you know, are grieving like, oh, I'm leaving my family home, or I'm leaving the city, it might bring up like other griefs that you've experienced throughout your life. Like, oh, this reminds me of when I lost this person or this other time. So the transitions can like bring up,
triggering.
Bring up other things. I'd say also a big one for anticipated and unanticipated transitions is anxiety, because this whole not knowing and lack of control and what's happening. And, you know, we're not necessarily super skilled at the navigating unknown. A lot of us or a lot of folks. And then I would just say in the harder category, or what was the language you used, Becky?
A depleting.
The depleting
Yeah.
category, it can exacerbate any sort of, like I said, with grief or anxiety, like it can exacerbate anything that is already underneath the surface. So
Sure.
there's something kind of that sort of you've been managing,
Yep.
but then there's this additional stress upon it.
Yep.
On you, it might make it more come to the surface. So
Well, and you said something interesting, Tara, in the first segment about comparison. And I think about how anticipated changes really could amplify that in terms of a mental health, that self-criticality. We might see other people, how they seem to be navigating so fantastically their transition
so
to
smoothly.
Beautiful
a new job.
Instagram pictures of
Yes,
it.
because that is for sure what their life is like.
Like, oh, you just moved into an apartment and you already are having a housewarming party.
Yes.
And I feel like I just am living in a tornado, or
as I stare at boxes that are unpacked.
Yes. So that I feel like could be this mental health component on telling ourselves or setting up some expectations of how one might navigate anticipated changes, and perhaps being judgmental or critical towards ourselves that it's only supposed to be positive, that we don't also see it as spaces of loss and the impact that could have on mental health too.
Yeah, I think common language use. So we do groups in addition to individual work, and one of sort of our ground rules or expectations is not using the word should. Like there's no shoulds in transition. Like there's no way you should be doing this. And I think pointing to that around comparison, like there's nothing wrong with the way it's different for each of us.
Yeah. Well said.
I think, and I don't know why I just thought of this, but as we're speaking, I think, wow, talking about this in May could not be more timely, in that so much of our listeners, so many of our listeners, and so much of the world right now, just in education, whether you're a parent or you're a student, this is a time of transition. And whether this airs now or in August, that idea of it is a season of transition. And so for anyone listening, like, oh my goodness, they can relate to this chapter.
You mentioned a couple times unanticipated transition, and probably many of you said this for yourself. Even there was an unanticipated transition that kind of catapulted you into even being interested in being a therapist. These are changes we don't see coming and are inherently unpredictable. Not only did we not see coming, it can maybe make that murky middle elongated because we don't even know what we don't even know. So shock is a huge component of unanticipated transition. These could be things like job loss, divorce, natural disasters, accidents, death. What kinds of support do you see as being needed during unanticipated transition?
We need a ton of support. All of us have been through difficult transitions, and I think it's just not something we can navigate alone. We need the landmarks. So I think of it almost like the unanticipated change or transition, or is like you sort of had this map of a route that you were on, or generally, even if you didn't know exactly the route, there's a map of where you might be going, or which way was north and which way was south, even if you hadn't chosen which way to go. And in some of these huge, sort of life quake kind of changes, there all of a sudden that gets thrown up in the air, and it feels like there is no north, south, east, west, a real disorientation to the map of life. And so when I think your question is like, what do we do with that, or how do we get support around that? And I think finding ways to orient. So whether that is a person, a friend, or a therapist that you check in with, or a group, whether that's sort of orienting practices you do, like, I don't know what next day is going to hold, but I know I'm going to go for a walk, or I know I'm going to journal, or I know I'm going to take a shower, or, those sort of things that help give us, make some guideposts along a way that feels completely unknown.
Well, and that's the thing, is when you look around in your world is not similar at all and is so unfamiliar in every aspect, you can still draw on something that's familiar. I think of the timeliness of the fires in California, where literally their whole world disappeared. but yet they still had, like you said, they could still go on a walk, right?
Mhm.
And that's not going to get rid of all of their issues, but it's going to give them that tiny semblance of normal, of I still have that comfort in knowing that's a part of my life before.
Mm.
Right,
Mhm.
right. One of the emotions we didn't talk about is panic, you know.
Mhm.
And in that space, I like, orienting of going for a walk, or even just the sky is above me and the ground is below me,
Mhm.
and there's a tree right here, and
Those
that,
grounding techniques.
disorienting.
Where are the
So-
spaces of consistency?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have the life transition that is called a non-event. And I'm so intrigued by these because non-events are not meant to minimize the actual event, but the idea is that these are life transitions where we expected one thing and a different thing happened. And it has me thinking about all of the times the non-events have happened in my life. Maybe we made an effort toward an anticipated change and it never came to fruition. Or it didn't turn out the way that we had anticipated it doing. I think a lot of our anticipated changes, we think I'm going to like get an apartment and I'm actually going to move in.
Right.
Or I'm planning to get married and I'm going to get married.
Well, and how little this is explored,
Yes.
and how many of these we have experienced in our
Yes.
lives, but yet never taken the time to really
And
support it
yes.
or explore it.
We might have had plans to have children and then experience infertility,
Mhm.
or look for a job and don't receive any offers. And
Yeah.
this means that we're dealing with, when you so beautifully highlighted, Juliana, the idea of loss and grief. In this particular kind of transition, we are dealing with this expectation of dreams and having these unmet. And sometimes it got me thinking, as I was thinking about this type of transition, the unique experience of guilt and injustice that could be present in this circumstance. Now, it doesn't mean that that isn't present in other types of transition as well, but how self-criticality, self-esteem might be present, even disappointment in the world around us, or comparison of looking at, hey, other people have these anticipated changes and it works out.
Which is so easy to do when something in your world didn't work out.
Yeah. Thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, as you talk about it, it makes me think about ambiguous loss. Like there are those changes where, like you got a cancer diagnosis and someone brings you a casserole, or, there are things that externally people kind of, even if we don't as a culture do it incredibly well, sort of have some way of holding space for, for some of these bigger things that can happen, like a graduation or a death or a marriage. But then some of these sort of more ambiguous, less clear losses, like infertility, there isn't a place, or the recognition or the holding broader in our communities around it. So I think that can make it especially isolating and painful.
Well, yes, we as a society just don't do a phenomenal job supporting others in those situations.
And maybe we don't think about it's a unique loss in the circumstances of having to adapt to what we didn't anticipate we'd have to adapt to. We wrote adaptation around an anticipated change or transition, and then got in our heads a story about what that was going to look like, and the difference between what we thought would be and what is. Which also leads to this another type of transition, which is called a sleeper change. These are transitions that suddenly appear, and so do also unanticipated losses. These are all, or unanticipated changes. These are all highly correlated here into this umbrella of transition. But these are transitions we don't seek, but they suddenly pop up and offer clarity about our lives. We've all had them. Examples of this can certainly be positive, like a promotion or a job offer just suddenly appears in our world. They can be challenging around realizing we're not satisfied with our relationship. People all of a sudden, in fact, I was just having a conversation recently with a friend of mine about kind of waking up one day and saying, I am absolutely not satisfied with my job. And it just kind of like coming into this space of clarity, needing something else. I think this happens in young adulthood frequently with, I had a college major.
Yes.
And I all of a sudden am not drawn to that anymore.
Yep.
So realizing that a path is maybe not of interest any longer and wanting a different direction. Either of you have any stories on a sleeper change?
Well, as we're sitting here in the radio station, that piece of just how this radio show came about. This
right.
idea of it literally just popped up, and then it just became a part of our lives and was like, oh, wow. Okay. Like, what changes is this then? What impact does that have on the rest of our lives and our schedule and therapy and things like that, where such an amazing, wonderful change, but it seemed as though it came out of nowhere, right? It wasn't like 10 years ago. I mean, we didn't even know each other 10 years ago. It wasn't like we were like, well, someday, and we're going to build off of this.
Right.
To me, in a way, it was a sleeper change.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about Juliana in your practice, because I could see that this idea of thinking through, does this seem impulsive or does this seem like clarity? That you probably sit with that with people who you work with or in the groups that you lead, where people are wrestling with this idea of, is this clarity or is this just me being impulsive?
Little midlife crisis action going on.
Yeah, right.
It does take some sitting with ourselves and our bodies and our, it takes a lot of self-reflection to discern that. But I think the people who at least seek out therapy or groups are people who are wanting to engage in that question of, how do I engage with this question in a way that is in line with my values, in alignment with, who I am as who I want to be, and not just like
super good
willy-nilly.
Because what you're saying is that the moment of clarity doesn't need to necessarily be the moment of action. They can be two different things. You're saying to pause with ourselves, be gentle with ourselves, sit in it. I think you said sit
whenever there's an opportunity to pause. I think it's usually a good thing.
Yeah, I would. I feel like that's maybe what you're saying is, when you have a moment of clarity, the moment of action should not be immediately following it. Pause a little bit.
Yeah.
Reflect.
Well, you had a word a few minutes ago, Juliana, called lifequake. I want to touch on this because in his book, Life is in the Transitions, Bruce Fallier developed the term lifequake. In the clinical world, we do reference this. And for those of you who are listening who are not familiar with it, these are significant life moments. So these are things that literally change the way we see the world around us, our paradigm. These can be every single emotion across the board, but foundationally shift meaning making, purpose, direction. They cause intense disruption, and we are never the same. Adults experience about 3 to 5 of these through their lifetimes. So that's a lot, and they can take
is a lot.
Years. They last years and can take years to integrate. So we're talking about really significant life moments. What would you say about these? How do you see these shaping humans? How do you help people navigate through them, Juliana?
Yeah, I would say the majority of people that I see in my practice are experiencing life quakes. Okay. And I appreciate you saying that it takes years, because I don't think that's something that we are prepared for. And, examples of life quakes are a really significant diagnosis, like a cancer diagnosis, for example, or other diagnosis that just changes everything you thought about your body. Something I see also is betrayal trauma. For example, somebody who's been in a marriage for decades and finds out that, their partner who they built their life with and trusted in every way was having some type of, wasn't who they thought they were in some ways. And then, sudden deaths or not sudden deaths also are these life quakes. And I think it takes a lot of, sometimes as a therapist and also as a client, you want to see like, am I through it yet? Am I there yet? It's like, this is going to be a long, gnarly and opening and surprising path.
Yeah. And probably with strong likelihood puts in place other transitions. So other unanticipated transitions, because a life quake, if we talk about things that fundamentally change who you are in this space.
Right.
There are going to be both anticipated things. You might decide from something, I'm in a new profession,
Right.
or I'm going to move to a new state, or
Mhm.
but it would ripple impact all sorts of other transitions.
That's a great point. And the language we use around that is nested transitions. So
Mhm.
it's like, say you go through a divorce, it's like, well, that impacts your finances, that impacts your
Mhm.
friends group, that impacts your family, that might impact where you live, it impacts your parenting, you know, the
Yes.
list goes on.
Yep.
So it's not just this one transition between you and your partner. It's
Right.
like
Yes.
a transition that impacts every different part of your life.
Right. Which is, yeah, you're not just grieving the loss of a relationship or a person. You're doing that, but then you're also
Mm-hmm.
having to address every single thing that's branching off of that.
Absolutely. And you both have mentioned this in different ways, but you're grieving the loss of this future that you imagined or
Mhm.
these stories that you
Yes.
had of what your life was going to look like.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a significant
Mm-hmm.
grief.
It is. Well, and it's that the idea that I think for so many of us that we want to believe we are the author of our story. And then one of these moments, whether it's a life quake or an anticipated or unanticipated thing, can be a first time for us to realize that we're not necessarily
Yeah.
the author of our story. And we're like, wait, someone else or something else
Mm-hmm.
is doing that.
That in itself is the biggest transition in some ways. This transition from thinking I am the author of my story to this, oh wow, I am not in control of this. And what am I? You know, how do I reorient to that reality?
Well, and that's a terrifying realization
really
for
is.
some,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Most, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost its own philosophical or psychological transition.
Well, yeah, it's a dilemma.
Yes,
know?
Yes.
I think that's the root of it, though.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk for a moment about different kinds of transitions, because we've sort of mentioned things that maybe are an individual or family, but in terms of levels of transitions, you probably see all of them in your practice and the work that you do with people. We can have transitions. We actively are as a society, individually, certainly family, communities can have transitions together. A demographic can have transitions. State and national, there's even global transitions. I think about, and we aren't naive here to think that we're only doing one transition at a time here too.
Well,
So
that'd be great if it was like, everybody, this is our time to.
yeah, I mostly wanted to hear your thoughts on, we might have transitions at all of these layers going on simultaneously that we're having to try to adapt to, because we aren't only doing an individual change and then a society says, okay, we're going to pause while you're doing your individual transition.
That's a great point. I think one way I really see this having happened is through the pandemic. And I think under processed really of how much the pandemic impacted every single one of these levels, from global, state, community, family, individual.
Yeah.
And that we're still working through what that means at each of those levels. Like I don't know what you two see in your practice, but I see daily or weekly in my practice how that global change is still rippling through people's lives individually and in their families. Do you see that?
Oh, for sure.
Yes. Well, I think mostly I want to bring it up in a way to help people say, gosh, it might be happening from all sorts of lenses. And when you reference the pandemic piece, it has shaped how lots of people work, where they work, if they're even in an office building, or what location, how they do what they do, and
how they communicate, how
Also,
they interact with others.
Yeah, also our relationships in society around what people think about vaccines or science or politics, how we think about illness, and like having a cold will never be the same.
Right.
In my family,
someone sneezing close to you, the reaction will always be different.
Yeah. So what about supporting someone else's transition? Because part of what we're talking about also in these levels or layers of transition, this might not be our own.
Yeah.
But we are, as your quote on your website talked about we're not doing it in isolation. Well, we are beings who are in connection.
Yeah.
So we are going to have people in our world who are going through transition and needing to offer support. What would you say to that?
I think the two things that come to mind are, one, consistently showing up. Like,
Mm.
I'm still here, checking in. Even, when someone's in the middle of a transition, they might have, that's really significant, they might not have the capacity to reach out. And so continuing to reach out, I know people can be like, I don't want to be a bother, but my experience is a reach out without expectation never hurts. And then I'd say the second thing is really said earlier, to avoid any kind of should language or advice, like unless somebody specifically is asking for advice. Typically people in transition are needing more listening than and then advising and shoulding, and this is what my friend did around this, or this is what you should do, or have you tried this supplement, or have you, more, how are you doing? What do you need? What are you noticing? Kind of questions.
It's really interesting that you say that, and I get a smile on my face as I'm responding to this, because I think about so often it feels like many of those comments are about our own anxiety and not wanting people to be in that murky middle space. We also want them to move to a space of knowing.
We hate seeing our people and suffering.
So the offering of, you should try this, or I knew somebody who did this thing. It really, the intention might be loving, and that is so much us also not liking that murky middle part of, let's just move to the where we know how to do this.
That's such a great point.
It is.
It makes me smile.
It does make me smile.
We all find ourselves doing that because we don't want to see our beloved people stressed out and not doing well. So I know I can help them. And the reality is, helpfulness is oftentimes not doing or not saying the thing.
Right. Yeah. So before we hit a commercial break, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, it's literally called Holding Space for Change.
Yeah.
Which I love.
I think the holding space piece is really, there is so much distraction. There's cell phones, there's social media, there's do this, busy, and change really needs some kind of like pushing out of all of the input and really connecting with yourself and who you are, what your values are, who you want to be. And so our practice kind of creates that sacred space to move through. And we do it in an individual way through therapy and spiritual direction. We do it through groups, support groups for people moving through divorce or other significant life transitions. And then we do it through holding space for rituals and rites of passage, like weddings and memorial services and that type of thing.
Well, it was part of what I love the name of your business, for one. I love that you are naming that transition is such a huge aspect of our lives. And by saying in the title, Holding Space for Change, you are actually making space for that change. And what you're saying as a business is, let's be thoughtful and intentional about how this shapes us as human beings. What are we, not only what are we navigating, but who are we becoming as we navigate the thing?
Yeah. And really supporting people and not rushing through it. Like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Let's just get to the next thing as quickly as we can. Yeah. Because people need to do that sometimes, and that's okay, whether it's for financial reasons or just not having capacity to sit with significant discomfort, which is understandable. But when we can hold that space, such beautiful and unexpected surprises and things that unfold that we couldn't have even imagined had we rushed through it. Right. I think we talked a little bit about some of the negative, the de-energizing, challenging parts, but we haven't talked about these amazing parts of getting unstuck, of experiencing more joy, of becoming more who you are, that in addition to it being fatiguing and a difficult process, both physically and emotionally, it can be such a life-giving time. And so holding space for that as well.
Yeah, well, in the way that we couldn't possibly write ourselves.
I love that.
It's there's something, you put amazing words to it on how beautiful some things we can realize and recognize about ourselves.
Yeah, if we don't create space for that, we might just miss out on
so people can find you on the web, look up your website.
holdingspaceforchange.com.
I love that.
I love that. And what a beautiful thing that many didn't know existed until now.
Thank you both.
And they can seek you
Yes.
out for all sorts of things, individual groups. So much to think about here. We're headed to a commercial break. But when we come back, we will talk through all of your questions on life transitions. Feels Out Loud will process listener thoughts in just a moment.
Yourself. You gotta find the people.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud. And this is the part of the show where we talk through questions from our beautiful listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing questions, or topics for each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly, or email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. We truly want to hear from you and what you are wondering about.
I love the questions that we got today about transition.
Love.
And we picked one particular one because I do think that sometimes when we talked about the unknowing and embracing the unknowing, but sometimes we do want to know what to do.
Oh, that's so important for our audience to just walk away with tangible things.
Yeah. And so in the midst of, I don't necessarily know how this is all going to work out. I don't know what this is going to look like. Maybe in that moment, for listeners who are going through a transition right now, that murky middle is kind of exactly what our listeners are saying. They say there's a transition, there's change and transition everywhere. How do I stay grounded? What are some tips to navigating transition? And Juliana, what would you say?
I'd say my top tip, I'm going to name a few, is really some kind of journaling or contemplative practice where you are holding space for yourself to check in with yourself. And if that's something that's really hard for you to do because of life, you know, that's scheduling an appointment with a therapist to help you, or some other type of person to help you hold space for you to do that inner work of reflection.
Okay.
I love that tip because that is it's making an intentional and thoughtful practice in daily life for just the feels about what's going on.
Yeah. And orienting to, like, you have to create space to figure out what you feel and think about things. You can't do that when you're busy all the time.
Yes.
So I'd say the second thing is that transitions are not just emotional things that happen. They are physical, embodied experiences. When we go through transition, we often are going to experience more fatigue or a higher need of sleep. And so really caring for your physical well-being through those just basic, you know, sleep, movement, water, food type of things.
Yeah,
Such
particularly life quakes.
Correlation. Yeah. Oh, yes. During the life quakes.
Yeah. And I'd say related to that would be self-compassion. So, you know, that means noticing the self-talk. That's what's wrong with me? Why aren't I through this yet?
Yeah.
Why aren't I like so-and-so? Those comparisons to I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. And this is a hard thing that I'm doing. And, and being kind to ourselves. Having some type of routine. We talked about going for a walk, but also sometimes through a really big transition, having some type of ritual. And it doesn't need to be a big thing. It could just be you lighting a candle for something that is ending in your life. It could be you having a couple of friends over for a meal where you each share something about something you're grieving from the pandemic, or you know, how you're sitting with the consequences of this election, or just kind of creating intentional spaces for honoring what's happening in our lives.
I love that.
No, I love what you're saying.
And then I can think of a few other things, but this one is maybe more when you're on the other side of your transition, like in your new beginning. For some people, a grounding practice is finding ways to support other people or doing some type of advocacy around what you have been through. So
like the pay it forward type concept a little bit.
Yeah, or it is the pay it forward, but it's also a way of integrating like a significant experience. For example, you know, if you've gone through a very difficult cancer journey and noticed that like the way that insurance coverage worked, or the way something worked did not work for you. And so it's like, I can have agency and do something about this.
That makes so much sense.
People, a way to integrate your
be that
transition.
voice.
Yes. Those are fantastic tools. I think I love all of the ideas that you shared, and we're already at the end of our show for today. I can't believe it. Thank you for listening this morning.
So much.
Join
thank
us
you for
next
coming.
week as we talk about men's mental health with special guest Mark Meyer. In the week ahead, be kind to yourself, everyone. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one that the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
Some will, some won't.